Have you ever told yourself, "I'll start tomorrow," and then tomorrow comes, and nothing changes? You sit there, thinking, planning, replaying. But something inside you just won't move. Do you ever wonder why this keeps happening to you? Why you keep waiting instead of taking action? Even when you know what needs to be done? It's not laziness. It's not a lack of ability. It's something deeper. Something quieter. And once you see it, everything begins to shift. You tell yourself you'll start when you feel ready. When things calm down. When your mind is clearer. When you're more confident. It sounds reasonable, even responsible. But notice how long you've been saying that. Weeks, months, maybe longer. The feeling of being ready keeps moving further away. Because readiness isn't something you wait for. It's something you build. Most people assume confidence comes first, then action follows. In reality, it's the opposite. You take a small step, and then a little confidence appears. You take another, and it grows. At work, you don't feel fully prepared before a new responsibility, you learn by doing. In life, you don't feel completely healed before moving forward, you heal as you move. Waiting for the perfect moment often becomes a quiet form of avoidance. Not intentional, but protective. Your mind is trying to keep things safe and predictable. But growth doesn't happen in perfect conditions. It happens in imperfect starts. When you begin before you feel ready, you interrupt that pattern. You show yourself that action is possible even with uncertainty. That you don't need full clarity to take the first step. Just enough willingness to move. And once you move, something shifts internally. The weight feels lighter. The resistance softens. And you realize you were never as unprepared as you thought. You were just waiting for a feeling that was never meant to come first. Taking action feels uncomfortable. That's the part most people quietly avoid. Not the task itself, but what it might bring with it, mistakes, judgment, the possibility of failing in front of others or even in front of yourself. So instead of stepping forward, you pause. You delay. You tell yourself you'll do it later, when things feel easier. But easier rarely arrives. The discomfort you're trying to avoid doesn't disappear, it just changes form. It becomes mental pressure. Overthinking. That constant feeling in the background that something is unfinished. And over time, that becomes heavier than the discomfort you were avoiding in the first place. Have you ever noticed that? The longer you delay something, the more energy it takes just to think about it. That's because avoidance has a cost. It quietly drains your focus and your peace. But here's the shift, discomfort is not a signal to stop. It's a sign that you're stepping into something that matters. Something that stretches you. Growth always carries a level of tension. It's not meant to feel completely comfortable. When you choose to move through that discomfort, even in small ways, you build resilience. You prove to yourself that you can handle pressure without collapsing under it. And that changes how you see yourself. Not as someone who avoids hard things, but as someone who can face them calmly, one step at a time. You tell yourself you just need more clarity. More information. A better plan. So you sit there, thinking it through again and again, trying to get it right before you move. It feels productive, like you're preparing. But if you're honest, how many times have you thought about the same thing, without taking a single step? Overthinking creates the illusion of control. It makes you feel like you're doing something, when in reality, you're just circling the same point. Have you ever caught yourself doing this? Replaying conversations, imagining outcomes, trying to predict every possible mistake before it even happens. The mind keeps searching for certainty, but life doesn't work that way. There will always be unknowns. And waiting for full clarity becomes another way of delaying action. The truth is, clarity is not something you achieve by sitting still. It's something that reveals itself once you begin. When you take a small step, even an imperfect one, your perspective shifts. You learn something new. You adjust. You move again. That's how real progress happens, not through endless thinking, but through movement. Overthinking often comes from a desire to avoid mistakes. But mistakes are part of the process, not a failure of it. When you accept that, the pressure to get everything right starts to loosen. And suddenly, action feels possible again, even without perfect answers. Deep down, there's a quiet hesitation that doesn't always show on the surface. You might appear capable, even confident at times. But when it comes to actually taking that step, something pulls you back. A thought like, what if I can't handle this? Or, what if I mess it up? That doubt doesn't always speak loudly, but it shapes your decisions. It convinces you to wait, to hold back, to stay in a space where nothing is tested. But the longer you stay there, the more that doubt grows. Because without action, there's nothing to challenge it. Self-trust isn't something you think your way into. It's something you build through experience. Every time you take a step, no matter how small, you gather evidence. You show yourself that you can respond, adjust, and continue. Even when things don't go perfectly, you learn that you can handle the outcome. That's what weakens doubt, not waiting, but doing. At work, you don't gain confidence by watching from the sidelines. You gain it by engaging, even when you're unsure. In life, the same applies. You don't become certain first and then act. You act, and through that process, certainty begins to form. And over time, that quiet hesitation loses its control, replaced by a steady sense that you can face whatever comes next. You tell yourself it has to be right before you begin. The timing, the plan, the way you show up, it all needs to feel complete. So you keep adjusting, refining, waiting for that moment when everything lines up. But that moment rarely comes. Because perfection is not a standard you reach, it's a moving target. The more you try to perfect something before starting, the more reasons you find to delay it. It feels responsible, even disciplined, but it quietly blocks progress. In reality, most meaningful growth begins in an unfinished state. At work, projects evolve after you start, not before. In life, clarity improves through action, not preparation alone. When you allow yourself to begin imperfectly, something shifts. The pressure reduces. You're no longer trying to get everything right, you're just trying to move. And movement creates feedback. You see what works, what doesn't, and you adjust. That's how progress builds. Perfection keeps you in your head. Action brings you into reality. The more you act, the less power perfection holds over you. You start to understand that mistakes are not setbacks, but part of the process. And once you accept that, starting becomes easier. Not because you feel perfect, but because you no longer need to. Sometimes it's not about the task in front of you. It's about what you've been carrying for a long time. Stress that hasn't settled. Disappointments that left a mark. Moments where things didn't go as planned, and something inside you became more cautious. That weight doesn't always show, but it influences how you respond. It makes you hesitate. It makes you second-guess yourself, even when the situation is different now. You might tell yourself you're just being careful, but underneath that, there's a layer of emotional fatigue. And when that builds up, even small steps start to feel heavy. That's why waiting feels easier. It avoids triggering those uncomfortable emotions again. But avoidance doesn't remove the weight, it keeps it in place. Emotional healing doesn't come from standing still. It comes from moving gently, in a way that feels manageable. Not forcing yourself into big actions, but allowing small, steady steps. Each step becomes a way of releasing some of that pressure. You begin to see that not every experience will repeat the past. That you can respond differently now. And over time, that weight begins to shift. Not all at once, but gradually. As you move forward, even carefully, you create space for yourself to breathe again. At some point, delay stops feeling like a temporary phase and starts feeling normal. You get used to telling yourself you'll do it later. You get used to carrying things unfinished. It becomes part of your routine in a quiet way. You don't question it as much anymore because it feels familiar. And familiarity can feel like comfort, even when it's not helping you. You might even convince yourself that you're just taking your time, that you're being thoughtful. But if you look closely, that space often lacks movement. It's not real rest, and it's not real progress. It's a kind of pause that stretches longer than it should. Over time, this pattern shapes how you see yourself. You begin to associate your identity with delay rather than action. And that can affect your confidence without you noticing it. Inner peace doesn't come from avoiding decisions. It comes from alignment, when what you intend matches what you do. Even small actions create that alignment. They bring a sense of stability back into your routine. When you break the pattern, even briefly, you interrupt that cycle of delay. And once that interruption happens, it becomes easier to recognize when you're slipping back into old habits. That awareness gives you a choice again, instead of repeating the same pattern without noticing. Time doesn't pause while you figure things out. It moves steadily, whether you act or not. Days pass in a way that feels subtle at first. One day becomes a week, then a month, and before you realize it, a significant amount of time has gone by without change. It's not dramatic in the moment, which is why it's easy to overlook. You tell yourself there's still time, that you'll get to it soon. But that assumption can quietly keep you in the same place. Have you ever looked back and wondered where the time went? Not because you were moving forward, but because you were waiting to begin. The reality is, time doesn't decide the outcome, your actions do. Even small, consistent steps can change the direction of your life over time. When you choose not to act, you're still making a choice, just one that keeps things as they are. Taking action doesn't mean rushing or forcing everything at once. It means respecting the fact that your time matters. That your energy matters. And that even a small step today carries more weight than a perfect plan that never begins. Now you see it. Why you keep waiting instead of taking action is not about laziness. It's about fear, doubt, discomfort, and habits that quietly hold you back. But here's the shift. You don't need to change everything today. You just need to start. One step. One move. One decision. That's how clarity comes. That's how inner peace builds. That's how your life changes. So ask yourself honestly, what's one thing you've been delaying that you can begin today? Share your thoughts below. How are you healing today? And remember, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to begin.